thing to have you joining this conversation. How are you? Okay. Let's continue then. Yeah. So, colleagues and friends, we have the work that is supposed to be done, and the name of the course is Cost and Management Accounting, right? SOB 2032. Yeah, the due date of it is actually in June 3rd, 2025, which is quite some time. We still have some time between now and then. But what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about uh, talking about the content of this assignment. So I've opened a new topic now, which is called inventory. What's this? Overhead costing. We want to cost the overheads. We have skipped the costing of labor. We don't want to cost labor this time around. But I think we'll come back to labor costing after some time. But right now, let's go and learn how to cost the overheads, which is very, very important. If you have looked at this question, this is overhead costing, basically. I'll introduce you and just give you the light of what labor costing is all about and how you go about it. Don't worry. We'll be able to do it. Actually, we'll be able to do it probably even in class, this same question. So don't stress, right? Right now, focus on listening and getting the knowledge. Then from there, this is the methods of preparing the profit and loss statement using the marginal costing and absorption costing and doing some reconciliation there. So we'll talk about this part again after talking about overhead costing. So that's the conversation we had. Okay. So let's start with overhead costing, right? A little bit about it. Just a little bit about overhead costing. Are you able to hear me clearly, and can you see the screen? Hello, can you hear the teacher? Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. So now, about labor, about overhead costing, if you do remember, if you don't remember, don't worry. We said the costs are usually classified into different classes or groupings, right? We have these different classes of the costs. And so the costs shall be made up of the following. For a manufacturing company, you have the cost of raw materials, right? Direct raw materials. Okay. No, let me write like this. Raw materials, raw material costs, right? The costing of raw materials. And then there is also the costing of labor, right? You need labor. These are basically wages. And from the costing of labor, there is also some expenses, right, that you incur. So this forms the total cost that is incurred. Now, listen carefully. On the other side, I want to write again raw materials. Again, you have labor costs, and then don't be lost. I want you to get the sense of what I'm talking about. I'm giving an introduction to the costs, to the topic, and the expenses here. Now, what is interesting to take home is that the same is divided into indirect and direct costs. So there are also what we call direct costs and indirect costs, right? Okay. So we can have what you call direct material costs, direct labor costs, and direct expenses. Consolidated, they give us what we call the prime costs. Is that clear? This forms what we call the prime cost. So when you hear somebody talk about the prime cost, they're basically talking about the direct cost, right? And that is to say the direct material cost, direct labor cost, and direct expenses. Yeah. Now, what are direct, costs? So let's pick raw materials. What are direct raw materials? Direct raw materials, colleagues, simply means those materials, okay, any cost that you incur to get the material that will be used directly into the product. You can directly trace these materials or associate them with a very specific product that is being produced, okay? So as long as these materials can be traced directly, they are used to produce a specific product or a specific service. Basically, those are called the direct raw material costs. You get the point, eh? For example, you're making chairs. That the wooden chairs, right? That wood or the log that you use to make that wooden chair, those are direct materials. You get it, right? The cost that you incur are the direct materials. You get the point? If you are doing whatever you are doing, whatever product you are producing, those materials that are used to produce that product, we call them the direct material costs, right? But on the other side, or on the other hand, you have those materials that cannot be traced with the specific product. You can't trace them to a specific product or maybe I associate them, yeah, of course, a specific product or service. These are called the indirect raw materials, right? They're indirect, they're not direct. You can't really trace them directly and say, oh, this raw material cost has been incurred because of this product or because of this service. Okay? We call them indirect material costs. Someone is asking, what about an example, sir? What about an example? Okay, we are still a company that manufacture, let's say, chairs, for example. Now, there are some, let's say, there are some things that you use to get those chairs, for example, and those chairs, equipments that you are using, again, they could be using some specific materials. So when you get those small, instruments that you want to use to make a product, to make an item that will be used to produce a specific product, those are indirect material costs because they cannot really be traced direct to a specific product. Labor costs. The same labor costs can be categorized into direct and the indirect again, okay? The labor costs, for example, is a cost, the direct one is the cost that you incur, all right, as you're trying to pay those people that are working, doing the hands or the work, like the actual work that the company exists to do. So for example, this company okay, let me pick an example of an institution that is there to teach, okay? Their work is just to offer teaching and training, right? They do teaching and training, that's all what they do. You get the point, eh? So now, what could be an example of direct labor? I'm emphasizing on this point. We need them. Look, our work that we do as a company is to teach and train. Any training, those are lecturers or teachers, you may call them. The amounts we pay them is direct labor costs. Is that clear? Those are direct wages for that matter. Why are they direct? Because as a company, we are existing to teach and train. And so these people that are involved in the teaching and training, their wages shall be called direct wages, hence direct labor costs.
Has been worked out.
Now, have you heard this one? Can someone just confirm they are able to hear me? And we proceed from here.
Yeah,
Okay, so now we talk about the, you can't hear me? Who is able to hear me? Is there anyone who can hear me? Just confirm you can hear me. Turn on your mic and say we can hear you. Simple.
Okay, now I can hear you. You went quiet.
Okay. Oh, it went quiet. From where? From when I started talking about the labor costs?
Yes.
Okay. So I was giving an example on the labor cost. I said this is the direct cost that is incurred paying the people that are doing the actual work that the company does exist to do. For example, if the company is existing to teach and train, like a college or a university, right? So their work that they do is to teach and train, isn't it? So the people who are involved, the salaries you pay them, you call that the direct labor costs. It's direct wages. Is that clear? Can you hear me now? Oh.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, on the other hand, there are those people, we know that a university is there to teach and train, isn't it? In the university, we teach and we do train, but there are so many other workers, other supporting staff or supporting departments that are there just to support the work, just to make sure that the work goes on well and we are working, we're doing fine. Okay. For example, there are cleaning departments, people that are cleaning. What else? You have security, isn't it? For those that provide security to us, you pay. There are those that there are those others that there could be maybe some canteen services being provided here and there. Okay, all these departments are important to help us really carry out our work very well. You get the point. But whatever amounts we are paying, whatever wages, salaries we pay those people in those departments that don't teach and train, that's indirect labor costs, okay? Those do form what we call the indirect labor costs because these are not actually involved. They are not heavily involved, in the work that we are doing as a company. So get to understand that. Similarly, also the expenses. Now, let's have the consolidation of the indirect costs. When you put all the indirect costs together, you make what we call overhead costs. Is that clear? Overhead costs. So overhead costs basically is the costing of overheads, the indirect costs. So now, in the previous conversations, we had some conversation on raw material costing. You learned how to cost raw materials. That's a point where you are learning LIFO, FIFO, inventory valuation. Right? That's costing of raw materials. And we'll still come back to this part of raw material costing when you look at process costing at some point. Okay. So we left that one. We were supposed to talk about direct labor costs, but we will not talk about labor costing now because of the assignment doesn't have that question. So we have crossed over to the other side and we're talking about the indirect what? The indirect costs, the overhead costs, if you may like to put that. So the consolidation of the prime cost and the overheads gives us the total production costs. So in the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to spend our time just talking about the overhead costs. That's what we're going to be conversating on. Okay? Shall just be talking about the overhead costs. The overhead costs, you learn how to cost the indirect costs, right? The indirect costs. Someone is asking, sir, what are some of the examples of the indirect costs? Indirect costs that are here like these, you know, indirect materials, rent, electricity, machinery, depreciation, indirect labor, all those, right? And the different departments like assembly department, stores department, maintenance department, among others, including mixing departments. So you'll understand that assembly and mixing department, these are production departments. Stores and maintenance, these are just a supporting ones. These are supporting departments. So you will learn how to cost and how to ascertain the total cost of production in such cases when you are working in such a setup or in such an environment where you have a lot of indirect costs. Really, how do you account and how do you cost the indirect expenses or indirect costs? And this is the question. This is a question that we have. There are different bases of allocating these costs to these different departments, and that's what we're going to be doing. And once we are done with that, that will be the end of that part of the question. Then we'll come to talking about profit and loss statements again, which is the other part of the question. This part of the question, this one coming down. We'll talk about it again. So that's what we are going to be talking about. Are there any questions? I've introduced you to labor costs. You know what labor costs are? What is the overhead costs? The overhead costs are basically the indirect costs, and they are the ones that we are going to be learning now. We are going to learn how to account for them as accountants. How do you really, account for them?